At this point, everyone's probably seen the Jurassic World Dominion 5-ish minute short film. This prologue was what was shown off in front of the 9th installment in Universal's only other money-making property, Fast and Furious. It was only available in the Imax version of the film. It then aired on NBC sometime in late November and is now out on YouTube for everyone to see. Disregarding my own thoughts on Jurassic World Dominion so far, what is this prologue about and how close to reality did it stick? And does that even matter with a property like Jurassic World? For those who haven't seen it, go see it and then come back. For those incredibly sensitive individuals who don't want to be spoiled on a lackluster and boring design for the new big bad dinosaur, you've been warned. I will be looking at it. Before delving into everything done right and wrong with this little short film, I think it is prudent to jump ahead and spoil that it's meant to take place 65 million years ago. This information is provided to the viewer once the short jumps to present day. After all the obligatory crediting and title cards have completed their cycles, we're greeted with this first shot. These first couple of shots take clear and heavy influences from The Lion King, Walking with Dinosaurs, Disney's Dinosaur, and more. This first shot is of a savanna-like spread of dragon blood trees. These Dracana trees are really cool and look almost prehistoric, except they really aren't that prehistoric. They are endemic to Africa, Asia, Australia, and some in Central America. Dragon blood trees belong to the angiosperm group of plants, which are known to have begun to diversify in the mid to late Mesozoic era, so like late Jurassic to Cretaceous periods. That being said, the oldest fossils known from these guys date to the early Neogene, so they were not around during the time of the dinosaurs. We know that this short is meant to take place 65 million years ago, so dragon blood trees shouldn't be here. The next shot is of some Badlands area. I must say that the cinematography, as usual, is absolutely impeccable. That's really the clearest win throughout the whole Jurassic World franchise so far. I'll let you in on another spoiler before it shows up. This is meant to take place 65 million years ago in North America. Precisely where in North America hasn't been said, but since this is clearly meant to have some semblance to the Hell Creek Formation, it's probably meant to represent Montana, South Dakota, or North Dakota. Whatever it is meant to be, this environment was not common in most of the continental US at 65 million years ago. In fact, the whole continent was devoid of prairies and savannas. Obviously, there were many different biomes, but the commonest ones included swamps, rainforests, and redwood forests. At 65 NYA, Montana and the Dakotas would have looked like the Florida Everglades with swampy marshes, wet forests, temperate forests, rainforests, and fern-covered clearings. This is not represented here. Then we are presented with a rather interesting shot of what first appears to be a pair of tree trunks, but eventually reveal themselves to be the legs of a sauropod dinosaur. First off, I'd like to point out that this is a neat trick. Some rabid fans would point out that this is reminiscent of the scene in the first Jurassic Park novel, in which Alan Grant mistakes an Apatosaurus neck for a tree trunk. But I would say this is quite a stretch. It actually aligns more with the deleted scene from the first Jurassic Park film, in which Grant was meant to mistake the Brachiosaurus legs for tree trunks. Here again, I'd say this is a huge stretch. If it really is meant to be a callback, I'd say shame on the director for not thinking of something more original, but whatever. A bug lands on the legs. Boy, what a big-ass bug. Looks like some kind of grasshopper. These guys are one of the few pieces of this thing that actually fit, as grasshoppers first diversified during the Triassic period. Though some folks have pointed out that the animal to which the legs belong, a Dreadnoughtus, is so big that this insect would be truly massive. I won't say much on the reality of this situation since there have always been big-ass bugs. Once the insect has irritated the animal enough, it reactively twitches its skin to shake off the bug. I don't think anyone involved with the film, besides the paleontology consultant, would know this, but apparently dinosaurs were probably incapable of doing this. Many animals have what is called subcutaneous muscles. These are fine, flat sheets of muscle lying directly beneath the skin in certain locations. They allow the animal fine motor control. Most animals have this kind of muscle, but only mammals evolved to have fine motor control of it. Mammals evolved this adaptation for stuff like whiskers, fast twitch reactions, blinking, shivering, and the sense of temperature, among other reasons. Birds have something similar, but it's more reserved for moving feathers. Therefore, their fine motor control isn't for moving bits of their body, but for moving the sites where the feathers connect to the body. Reptiles just can't do it. Most non-bird dinosaurs were probably incapable of such fine motor controls as those of the twitching sauropod. The more you know. The scene opens up as the camera moves away from the sauropod legs to show us the whole body of these behemoths. I name-dropped what these creatures are supposed to be earlier. They are Dreadnoughtus. These guys are titanosaurian sauropods found exclusively in South America. Specifically, all known remains were found in Cretaceous period rocks from Argentina. More than one specimen exists, stretching the known time range of these beasts from 85 to 66 million years ago. That means these guys were around during the time this prologue is supposed to take place, but were on a completely different and separated continent at the time. As far as the design itself is concerned, these are probably the most accurate depictions of sauropod dinosaurs in the entire Jurassic franchise. Titanosaurs were anatomically quite distinct from most of the well-known sauropods, like Apatosaurus or Brachiosaurus. They were thick-boned, heavy-set creatures, usually with long, sturdy necks and tails. I want to think that maybe the musculature of these guys is a bit too mammalian, but I don't think it strays too far from what is known about the actual musculature of these animals. The skin is really the only questionable part. Though we don't know how wrinkly these animals got, there have been fossilized imprints of sauropod skin uncovered. They had scaly skin with those scales varying in size and shape. I highly doubt a sauropod's skin would have been quite so much like that of an elephant or rhino. We are then presented with our next big set piece, the pterosaur gathering. In this chunk of scene, there are huge flocks of very tiny pteranodont-type pterosaurs, which scatter once the immense Quetzalcoatlus show up. This is easily one of the biggest wins for the Jurassic franchise right here. Not only do Quetzalcoatlus fossils show up in 65-million-year-old rocks from across North America, including Montana, but the design for the creature is probably the most scientifically accurate one ever seen in the entire franchise. One main Quetzalcoatlus flies up close to the screen to land on a carcass that some eagle-eyed or delusional Twitter folks have speculated to be a mosasaur, before squawking at the audience. These guys are depicted covered in a fuzzy hair-like coat of pycnofibers. Pycnofibers may be independently evolved hair-like filaments, or they may have some evolutionary origin in feathers and would have helped these critters stay warm when flying. All pterosaurs had them. Quetzalcoatlus and relatives were the largest things known to have flown, with the largest having wingspans of 40 feet or more. The Royal Tyrrell Museum Twitter account did a little Twitter thread on all the inaccuracies of this little short film, and in that thread, they brought up an hypothesis by one of their top paleontologists, Dr. Donald Henderson. That hypothesis being that the huge pterosaurs, like Quetzalcoatlus, were too big to fly and would have been flightless ground predators. Unfortunately for the Royal Tyrrell Museum, this goes against almost all evidence provided by the fossils of these great animals. It's also a very niche minority hypothesis only a few people hold, like the infamous David Peters. Almost every single pterosaur expert has discredited this hypothesis. I'll make sure to provide a video explaining that in detail at a later date. Next, we are presented with a few Ankylosaurus guzzling some water in the same river as the previous scene. This is another temporal win, as Ankylosaurus did live in North America at 65 million years ago. Unfortunately, it's also a big loss as it reuses the design of the Ankylosaurus from previous Jurassic World films, which is woefully outdated. Go see my video on the evolution of our idea of Ankylosaurus to find out more about why this thing is wrong. Ooh boy, more pterosaurs! Next, we get to see that same river flowing its way through some nice lime or sandstone cliffs covered in squawking pteranodons. The design is again reusing Jurassic World models, so the same inaccuracies are copy-pasted here. They're too wrinkly, the head shape is all wrong, they look too humanoid, and don't seem to be covered in pycnofibers. To make things worse, Pteranodon itself was extinct by 65 million years. Pteranodon fossils are found in rocks that date from 89 to 83 million years ago. They were very common parts of the Western Interior Seaway ecosystems. At the time of this prologue, the Western Interior Seaway had mostly receded. Pteranodons should not be here. Oh, great. The cave scene. The next thing that shows up is supposed to silence all the pedantic nerds who've been harping on the Jurassic franchise for years about adding feathers to the dinosaurs. There's a big problem with that being that certain dinosaurs did have feathers, and plenty didn't. Feathers were never the real issue, it's always been the anatomy itself. Here we have what is confirmed to be an oviraptor, a small parrot-like dinosaur known for its blunt beak, cassowary-like crest, and fossils found atop clutches of eggs. The way the animators have this oviraptor move is a total win, as it twitches and struts like a modern bird, which it was most closely related to. The big loss here is the anatomy. Yes, the thing is covered in feathers, and not too shabby feathers either, but the arms are awful. The real animal's arms were forced into a neutral position. They could not pronate. In other words, their arms were always held in a clapping position rather than a slapping one. On top of that, the real animal is confirmed to have had huge, bird-like feathers covering the entire arm. These feathers are called pinnaceous. They are veined feathers and would have attached to the upper arm, the forearm, and the hand, specifically to the second finger. There's no room here for speculative creative freedom, ifs, ands, or buts. They 100% had feathers in these places. Besides the glaring issue, the rest of the anatomy is pretty good. One thing that is cliché about the scene involves the nest of eggs. You see, the name oviraptor means egg thief because many of the first fossils found of the animal were found atop clutches of fossilized eggs. The discoverers thought this meant the animal was trying to eat them. Decades later, with the help of more complete oviraptor skeletons atop clutches of eggs with preserved embryos, it was found that the eggs belonged to the oviraptor, and it was a parent protecting its eggs. The stereotype of these dinosaurs specifically being egg eaters has stuck ever since, despite every scientist's warning otherwise. That being said, these critters were probably omnivores of sorts and would have definitely eaten eggs if given the chance. You'll be hard-pressed to find any modern animal that would turn up a free meal of eggs, so it's kind of one of those things that is cliché, boring, and outdated, but coincidentally would have happened anyway. Unfortunately, I'm not done with oviraptor. The genus Oviraptor is known only from rocks dating to 75 to 71 million years ago in what is now Mongolia. Yep, Oviraptor should not be here. Real minute nitpick on this scene. Why is there a nest of eggs on a cave floor? There's no way an animal would be able to keep that warm and dry on the bottom of a cave. Next cut is the herd of Pseudoceratops. The design here is copy-pasted from the one which appeared in the 2019 Battle at Big Rock short film. Gotta keep continuity despite this specifically being a documentary-esque snapshot of what's supposed to be latest Cretaceous North America. These guys are pretty good when it comes to accuracy to the known anatomy of the real animal. Despite that, they still fall victim to the really odd choices made on Jurassic World ceratopsians. Their tails are much too long, their feet are those of elephants or rhinos, the head is a little too large, and the overall build of the animal looks like they used rhinos as the main and only reference. I think they did a really good job in showing behaviors in this scene, with some wallowing in a river. The exact dynamics of these dinosaurs' social lives remains a hot topic of discussion among experts. There is a good amount of bone beds that show a diversity in age, suggesting that at least some horned dinosaurs did live in herds or groups. Whether or not they herded like modern mammals, as seen here, remains a mystery. It's a really common cliche seen across a lot of movies and documentaries, so it would have been nice to see something original, but whatever. As if it's really a big surprise at this point, Pseudoceratops comes from rocks that date to 76 to 75 million years ago in what is now Utah. It really shouldn't be here. Finally, we're coming to the latter half of the short film. Now we see some small theropod picking meat out of the teeth of a much larger theropod. This amazingly rendered little fella is Moros. Moros was an early diverging tyrannosaur, but its remains consisted only of a leg bone. Yup, that's it. It makes some sense to choose an animal known from very fragmentary remains so that you'd have a lot more creative control on how you reconstruct it, since no expert knows for sure. But why choose a fragmentary animal that has little information on it when you could just as easily choose one that is more well-known, has more bones, and actually belonged in the setting you chose? Yeah, that's right. Moros comes from a layer of rock dating to between 100 and 93 million years ago in Utah. It was a very early offshoot of the Tyrannosaur family. It also shouldn't be here. It does have a nice coating of protofeathers though, and these animals were on the part of the theropod family tree that would have had feathers, so good on them. Next comes the new big bad dinosaur, Giganotosaurus. Here, the beast is depicted clad in crocodilian scutes, scales, and tail fin spines. Why? I don't know. No known dinosaur has ever been found with anything resembling the armor of crocodilians, and dinosaurs are only distant cousins to the big scaly puppies. Using crocodilians as a reference is bad form, as these animals are specifically adapted to their semi-aquatic ambush predator of the riverbanks way of life. No known dinosaur has ever taken on this exact way of life. It sure adds some visual flair, but there are many other ways one could have done that without slapping on a bunch of things we know the animal didn't have. Hey, at least the wrists of the critter aren't broken. The skull of Giganotosaurus is fragmentary and has never had a full description. Since its discovery, many relatives with better skull fossils have been found, and they show a general skull shape that looks like this. The speculative complete skull made of Giganotosaurus and used for many decades, this guy right here is old and wrong, being filled in with the information available at the time of its discovery. There's a large chance that the full skull of the animal may have looked more like this. More like its relatives Carcharodontosaurus, Concavenator, and the like. In regard to this new Jurassic World design, they actually did that part correct. But this scene shows the Giganotosaurus confront a Tyrannosaurus. Giganotosaurus never would have met a Tyrannosaurus, as it is known from Argentina and dates to 99 to 97 million years ago. That's a good 20-ish, 30-ish million years before Tyrannosaurus existed and before this prologue is supposed to be set. The Tyrannosaurus is just the same one we always see. This time they patched on some dino fuzz, so that's cool I guess. This situation is a bit ironic actually. Tyrannosaurus belongs to a group of dinosaurs called Coelurosaurs. There's at least one example from every group within this much larger group preserved with feather imprints. Most of them come from the early part of their respective group. That means each group within the Coelurosauria has the potential to have had feathers to one degree or another. That led to speculation that Tyrannosaurus itself would have had feathers too. That made a lot of man-children angry, as feathers would suddenly make their giant murderous grizzly hawk feminine, not scary, and lame. Despite this subjective drivel, the anti-trope was laid, and reconstructions clad in all sorts of feathers flowed. Then, more research was done on the connection between size, metabolism, and skin coverings. Turns out, the bigger you get, the easier you can retain your body heat or lose it. The amount of covering an animal has also has some connection to where they live. A giant animal living in a very hot climate is more likely to have less hair or feathers so it doesn't overheat, and have body parts that let it quickly lose heat. The research found that there was an upper limit. Things above a certain weight, around 1 to 2 tons, would have less covering than those animals below that weight. A proceratosaurid tyrannosaur called Eutyrannus shows that the situation is way more complex than this though. It was an animal that pushed above 1 to 2 tons and was preserved covered in feathers. Birds can use their feathers for both cooling and heating themselves. That means things as big as Tyrannosaurus, living in the warm, marshy environment that it did, probably didn't have a huge coat of feathers. But until hard evidence is found, the possibility of some sort of feathering remains. Anyone saying that giving the Tyrannosaurus peach fuzz isn't accurate is unaware of the complex situation, and to be honest, that's totally valid. The Tyrannosaurus and time and space traveling Giganotosaurus get into a fight because that's always what happens in these films. Remember, these are animals, not monsters. In real life, animals tend not to fight each other at every opportunity. The first response to an approaching intruder or enemy is to bluff. That kinda happens here when both roar at each other, but then they immediately devolve into attacking. Real life would suggest a standoff of noises, body signals, and more before something as serious as a fight. Fighting doesn't benefit either party as they both risk dying. Fighting is generally a last resort. Obviously, real life is messy and plenty of animals just attack at the drop of a hat, so I'm not saying this is purely science fiction nonsense, but rather a tired old trope that is better left in the trash. The Giganotosaurus quickly dispatches the Tyrannosaurus with a bite to the neck, as if we haven't seen that before, and trips the Rex into a wash before it dies, only for a mosquito to come along and suck some blood to reflect the origin of the Jurassic Park's Tyrannosaurus. The fight can therefore be excused to some degree since it needed to happen in order for the Rex to get its DNA taken and preserved to be made in the first film, and so on and so forth. Though, would a mosquito even be able to penetrate the hide of a Tyrannosaurus? I mean, the hides of the biggest dinosaurs were probably quite thick, as they are in even the largest animals today, which are dwarfed by the dinosaurian titans. Whatever, super minor. Just like with the abnormally strong Spinosaurus of Jurassic Park 3, the Giganotosaurus wouldn't have had a strong enough bite to be able to bite through the Tyrannosaurus's neck enough for an instant kill. This can be corroborated by research done on bite force by the Royal Tyrrell's Dr. Francois Therrien. Therrien and team found that Tyrannosaurus would have had a bite force 3 to 5 times as strong as animals like Giganotosaurus. Giganotosaurus and the Carcharodontosaurs were adapted for slicing huge chunks of flesh off of sauropod dinosaurs, not pulverizing bone and breaking necks in a single bite like the Tyrannosaurs. Before we get to the end of this video, there remains one other dinosaur. The Giganotosaurus spooks the hell out of a small ornithopod dinosaur, which has been officially referred to as Iguanodon. Iguanodon is one of the oddest of the normal ornithopod family, and by normal I mean without all the cool crests and wattles and stuff. These guys were the roid monsters of the ornithopod family. They had enormous forearms, nearly as robust as their back legs, with muscle attachment sites that would suggest massive gorilla arms. The hands were also quite large, being about as large as the feet, ending in 3 hoof-like toes, plus a prehensile pinky. A thumb spike took the place of the actual 4th finger, and would have provided the critter a nasty hand spur for fighting or defense. The head was also quite unusual when you really take a long look at it and compare it to things like Edmontosaurus. I've seen the evolution of Iguanodon and its anatomy referred to as intense, and I can't think of a better way to describe it. The skull was vaguely horse-shaped with a huge, robust, square jaw with huge attachment points to the skull. The whole thing was just absolutely robust and heavily built. This is nothing like what is seen in this Prologue Iguanodon. In fact, it appears more like the lighter-built cousin of Iguanodon, Mantellisaurus. Of course, Iguanodon is also known exclusively from 126 to 122 million years old Europe. It should not be here. Wait. What is that? No, not the dinosaur. The stuff on the ground. Is that grass? Oh, no. You know what wasn't covering the ground throughout both the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras? Grass. Grass is actually a weird one, too. Grass is so ubiquitous in today's world that it's impossible to think of a world without it. But that's how it was. Instead of grass, ferns covered the ground wherever there were plants covering the ground, of course. What's actually even more interesting is that grass evolved in the Cretaceous period when the angiosperm plants were starting to diversify from the gymnosperms. Bits of a grass-like plant were found in the fossilized dung of a sauropod dinosaur from the late Cretaceous. This doesn't invalidate my criticism because grass is so uncommon in the Cretaceous fossil record that it still wouldn't have been covering the ground everywhere. That didn't happen till the KT extinction killed off a lot of the ruling plants of the Mesozoic. Grass opportunistically took over the scorched earth and became what it is today. So what should they have done? Well, funny thing is, most of the dinosaurs that appear in this prologue have equivalent dinosaurs that did actually live in Western North America at 65 million years ago. There was a giant oviraptorosaur around called Anzu, which easily could have taken the place of Oviraptor. There was one giant titanosaurian sauropod in North America. That was Alamosaurus. Sure, Alamosaurus was restricted to the southern states, but no reason it couldn't have just been in this area for this short film. ILM literally still has access to the gross Jurassic World Triceratops design, so I have no idea why they didn't just use Triceratops instead of Nasutoceratops. Edmontosaurus would have replaced Iguanodon. Pteranodon could have just not been in this short, or been the eagle-sized primitive bird Avisaurus. Plenty of dromaeosaurs could have been in the place of Moros. Why did Giganotosaurus have to be here? To fight the Tyrannosaurus when there's fossil evidence that Tyrannosauruses fought each other? Well, I know why they did it economically, but it makes no sense in the context of the short film itself. They put a time-traveling, continent-hopping Giganotosaurus in the short because it is meant to be a metaphorical origin story of the Tyrannosaurus that's been in the franchise since the beginning. It somehow counts as a character, rather than a Deus Rex Machina moving obstacle that it acts as in the first two films, so it suddenly has to have a story behind it despite having no characterization to it beyond a monster that goes after prey items that are way too small and offer very little nutrients. Whatever. The Giganotosaurus is rumored to also appear in the full Jurassic World Dominion film as a foil to the Tyrannosaurus. We, as the audience members, are supposed to root for the death of the Giganotosaurus in the present due to its killing of the Tyrannosaurus in the past. But remember guys, remember fans, these are supposed to be animals, not monsters that are forced to fight each other like kids smashing toys together. Some might throw out the old, "It's not meant to be a documentary, it's fine if everything is inaccurate, doesn't make sense, it has dinosaurs and that's just cool as is." This would be a valid point if this prologue wasn't trying to actually represent a real time and place. This actually is meant to be something of a mini documentary to show what life was like 65 million years ago. Trevorrow has mentioned that it's sort of supposed to be metaphorical. I don't really know what he means though. Metaphorical to what? Of what? The entire thing plays out like real life except that everything is wrong. I'm kinda glad it got cut out of the final film, since it would 100% create a whole new confusion among audience members us science communicators would probably be dealing with for years to come. Now, don't take that to mean I begrudge doing science communication, but like, it would have been just as easy to make this thing mirror reality as it was to screw with the details. The filmmaker knows what he's doing, and everyone involved knew what they were doing. It's not like they're all idiots that don't know how to look something up on Wikipedia. I don't even expect any of the people working on these projects to be experts on dinosaurs. I personally believe that any creature designer working on a project like this should have a rudimentary handle on the animal they are hired to design though, so a brief skim through a Wikipedia article would be the baseline, but that's just me. I also want to make it clear I'm not really blaming Trevorrow for any of this really. Rumors are that Universal forced Trevorrow's hands on a bunch of designs to make them scarier and more exaggerated. I find it absolutely mind-blowing that terminally online people think that it was the consultant, Dr. Steve Brusati's fault for the obvious inaccuracies in the animal designs. He doesn't have final say, and anything he tries to get in can just as easily be thrown out by a higher-up. You know what's also a funny thing that pretty much everyone in paleontology, geology, and evolutionary biology knows, but I guess somehow slipped through the cracks? The end of the Cretaceous has been updated due to better dating techniques since the 80s and 90s. It used to be 65 million years ago when the asteroid struck and the fifth mass extinction occurred, but it's now more like 66 million years ago. A very small thing, I know, but just one more straw to strain the camel's back, right? To preempt all the haters and trolls, I don't hate anyone who likes this. Me critiquing this harmless short film doesn't mean I'm attacking you. You are allowed to like whatever you like, and I'm allowed to critique whatever I want to. I've provided all the reasonings and studies behind my critique, so if you disagree, you are free to do so. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, hit the bell icon for updates, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Special thanks goes to my Elephant tier patrons, Thea Svensson, Staniforth Hopkins, Dinosaur, Chris Frampton, Biotaverse, Arda Bayer, and Christoph Hubbinger, as well as my Tyrannosaur patrons, Iron Bladesman, Henry Brennan, Danny Van Heck, and Dana Manchester.